right, welcome everybody. This is our first live edition of Matillion's Deep Dish Data. We're here live in Chicago at OneSix's headquarters. Again, it's our 1-year anniversary, so we decided why not do it at the home of, and let's see if I get it right, Deep Dish Pizza here in Chicago. So afterwards, I think we'll all be enjoying some pizza. And I wanted to welcome my guests first. So we'll start with Joe on the end, who is coming back for the 1-year anniversary. So Joe helped me kick this series off a year ago. So thank you, Joe.
Thanks for having me back.
Quick introduction, and you can plug your book if you want.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks for having me back too. It's a lot of fun. So good to be back here. Yeah, I'm Joe Reis, co-author of this book I'm plugging, Fundamentals of Data Engineering. You may have heard of it. And yeah, what else? Recovering data scientist, still practicing data engineer and architect, and working on a new book on data modeling out this year. Also got a new course in Coursera coming out this year.
I want to take the course and read the book. Does that make me a nerd?
Yes.
A geek? A data geek. I have stickers for data
A deep
geek.
dish nerd, yep.
Deep dish nerd. All right, Joe, thank you. Molly?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Molly Sandbo, fellow deep dish nerd. I started my career in consulting at PwC and then transitioned into product marketing all across the data lifecycle, from data visualization, now working in the data integration transformation space, and most recently focused on everything generative AI, director of product marketing at Matillion. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Good to
Thank
have
you,
you.
Molly. Mike?
Mike Gavin, CEO, co-founder here at OneSix. So we're a data and analytics consulting shop here in Chicago. Been around for about 10 years and probably been doing this for about 25. You know, a little less gray than most expect, which is good. Yeah. No product.
Looking good.
I mean, nothing.
Looking good, Mike. Looking good. Yes. Yes, and I'm Mark Balkenende, the host, VP of Product Marketing here at Matillion. I spent about 13 years in the industry. See, I don't say 25 years, I make you do the math. So about 13 years here in Chicago, so it feels good to be back home in Chicago, doing data integration, master data management, governance for some small companies here like Abbott and Motorola and Walgreens, just to name the smaller ones. And now I've been the last about 12 to 13 years in software doing product marketing like Molly. So yeah, let's get started. Now, Joe, I know it's been a year since I asked you this question last, but what is your favorite pizza? Has it changed in a year? And do you like pineapple on your pizza?
Favorite pizza, definitely Hawaiian pizza from Domino's. Best pizza ever.
I don't believe
kidding.
you.
I was in New York City a couple months ago, and I had I was at Joe's Pizza, not because it's my name, but because it's good pizza. So I like the thin crust. No offense to Chicago. I like the
Not for everybody.
The giant
Pie.
football pie as well. But yeah, I'm a New York pizza guy though. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So pineapple, yes. Sorry, did you say yes to pineapple?
No, I think it's kind of revolting actually.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Got it. So the Italian.
Revolting.
And ChatGPT last time.
Sorry,
we checked.
Mark.
I haven't checked recently, the last 6 months or so maybe we should retry it. I don't have my phone, so we can't do that. Molly, favorite pizza and pineapple, yes or no?
Favorite pizza, I don't discriminate. I like New York, I like Chicago, I like Detroit, all of them. But I do, it's delicious if you haven't tried it.
Right.
But my one consistent thing is it has to have pepperonis on it, and I need a side of ranch. So
Side of ranch for your pizza.
that's my,
Interesting.
I'm from the Midwest, and that ranch
I'm
is
from
big.
the Midwest, and I don't do that.
And I am not a pineapple on the pizza person.
All right, two for two so far. Mike, favorite
So
pizza?
I mean, I'm a little jaded.
Yeah.
Right. Born and raised on the South Side, have never left. Like one of those guys here in Chicago. So.
True Chicago.
But I will tell you, most people think deep dish is like everyone in Chicago's favorite.
You're right.
I don't dislike it, but like I can't eat that every other week.
I couldn't either when I lived here.
Yeah, I mean-
once a month maybe, every 2 months.
the
a
boyish
quarter.
figure won't stay, right?
No. Yeah, this voice.
But for me, it's the mom and pop shop, local in the neighborhood, what most people kind of call pub style.
Okay.
Don't cut it in triangles, cut it in squares for me.
Squares.
Thin
You're a
crust.
Square person.
And
That's
you know, I
nice.
like the cheese a little burnt, you know?
Nice. Nice.
Burnt cheese is good.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah,
I'm a fan.
Absolutely.
Pineapple, no for me.
No for you
But
as
I'm
well.
not going to hate on it.
Yeah, well, that's good. I don't hate on it either. So that's interesting. Square cut pizza. Maybe that's my next round of questions this year. Do you like your pizza square or in?
Well, it's the same argument with sandwiches. You're going to get diagonal cut or across the bread.
right.
Yeah. So.
True. I don't like pineapple. I've shared all my pizzas, but since I'm in Chicago, I do like the sausage deep dish. But it's true, it's hard to eat that, and it has made its way out to Denver. So maybe once a year we have some deep dish
There you
pizza, just to remember our Chicago deep dish pizza days. But I'm a no on pineapple as well. But just for those out there, I've noticed on LinkedIn that people think that I won't like you if you like pineapple on your pizza. That's not true. I don't hold it against anybody. My kids actually both like pineapple on their pizza, so just wanted to clear that up before.
Mark will actually give you a LinkedIn endorsement if you like pineapple. So
if you like pineapple,
just message him.
Just message me.
He'll do this for you.
Absolutely. But I did see that the other day. I was like, oh, Mark probably won't like it if I say I like pineapple. Like, that's not true. Awesome. All right. So where do we get started today? So today, I believe the topic was AI-ready data, but I wanted to just kind of dive into just the basics of data to begin with, some data management basics to get started before we get into the AI. I mean, we have to, everybody has to talk about AI, of course, but let's talk a little bit about some of the basics. I mean, the fact that, Joe, you're writing a new book on data modeling is exciting for me because I think that it's been forgotten almost. It feels like, the younger generation of data engineers and people don't think that much about even the basics of data modeling. What chapter is it? 13?
8. I'm just trying to, no, it's 8,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to figure out, we spent basically 6, oh yeah, what is the data model? So we spent, let me see how many pages on this thing. Not that far, not that long talking about data modeling, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But you talk to some younger people and they're like, what's a one-to-many? I don't know what a surrogate key is, not to get too geeky, but it's like, come on guys, this is basic data modeling. So
Yeah.
it was much farther back in the book, I'm sorry.
20 pages, but yeah, I mean, it's, so I mean, we could talk about, I think data-ready data, right? Not just AI, but
Just any ready data.
right. I mean, how often do you find data is ready for any particular use case or consumption? I'm sure you run into this all the time in your practice, right?
Yep.
Most data sets are really gnarly, and this is sort of the fact of life, and so. But I think nowadays we have to focus on either establishing that foundation and getting the fundamentals in place. Forgotten practices like data modeling, I think do need to come back for AI to really work. We can get into the details of why that is later when we talk about AI, but this is a moment to shine. I think there's a lot of attention on data, and if we're not going to do it now, then like when are we ever going to do it? Like you have all the money and attention on this right now. So.
Yep.
There's a lot of attention on the data right now and data practices. So are you seeing the same thing? I know you were telling a pretty crazy story last night. But
Yeah, I mean, the modeling piece is really interesting. Like a guy that's been doing this for 25 years, it was so important even 10 years ago to get the model right? And I think we've got the luxury now of some of these modern data platforms like Databricks and Snowflake, et cetera, where you can write some pretty crappy code and it still performs. You can put a pretty crappy model in place and kind of gets the job done a little bit.
is that an excuse to do crappy code, though?
No, I don't think so. And that's the point. The point is there's a lot of foundational things that are applicable regardless of technology. And when you think about modeling the data, you're modeling the business at the end of the day. So you can really screw that up and create some ridiculous results, right?
What's like a horror story that sort of maybe comes to mind? You can keep it anonymous, obviously, but
Yeah.
They'd appreciate that, I'm sure.
So I know I've got a great horror story. So at one point, everybody loved the flexibility of name value pairs.
yeah.
And for your applications and kind of data input, right, works just fine. When you start trying to get data out and report consistently on that, some guy types in a typo and I've got 4 versions of that output, and now Illinois is spelled 16 different ways. Like it just becomes a nightmare on the output side, and be able to do the actual true analytics and have some consistency. And I wish I couldn't say I've seen that more than once, but it's been the case.
Forgotten all about name value pairs. Thanks for bringing that back. It's a little bit PTSD there, but It's not too far off from even like JSON though. If you have just random JSON elements that get added or removed, and misspelled elements and things like that from random developers, I think it's the same problem, right? Yeah. So you have to ultimately start structuring that and modeling it for your business, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think I saw a post, I think it was by you, Joe, or there was a thread on LinkedIn about the unstructured data that's, you know, the coming into the business now, video, image, and how do we store that? Or I know Molly, you've been talking to a lot of customers too, but you know, round you guys' thoughts on how that's coming into the business now because of this new technology with generative AI making it easier for everybody. It's a new problem, right? So how are you guys tackling it? What are you guys seeing?
I don't know, what do you think, Molly?
Yeah, so what we're seeing with our customers is there's some folks on one end that are like all about unstructured data. How do we bring in our PDFs? How do we bring in our video files? How do we bring in our images? And how do we merge that with structured and semi-structured data? But then we also talk to a lot of folks that don't even know the different data sets that are now possible or on the table, or that you can bring it in and then use data from other data sets. And how do you even get started? So there's just such a huge spectrum of what people think is possible. And then once they realize it's possible, it's like, oh, how do I get it in? But then how do I actually get it data ready, if you will?
Sure, get it ready.
Yeah, I mean, the post was about actually an image that my friend Will Rojas showed me. So he runs a company called Coactive. They do search on unstructured data sets, so video, images, but with no metadata. That's the catch.
Yeah.
It's pretty ridiculous, actually. It's really cool. So like him and his co-founder are like pretty well pedigreed in the ML AI space. But he had this notion too, where if you take the amount of structured data in the world, relative bodies of water size, maybe that's the size of Lake Tahoe. If you take all the text data, maybe that's a Caspian Sea. But all the images in the world, that's maybe the Pacific Ocean. And then videos, well, I'm sure you can extrapolate out, but it's in terms of just pure data sizes. And so, but if you walk around, you know, I was driving here, I saw many video cameras. What are we doing with all that data? You know, what are we doing with all this unstructured data? I think that's the next frontier. And
what can we do with it?
That's just it. I mean, there's probably a whole lot of stuff we could do with it, right? I mean, but an interesting, you know, kind of maybe a dystopian sort of example, but a friend of mine was telling me he was in China recently, and you know, they have it's probably gonna scare everyone away actually. So, but they had you know, so they have this video system there. But if you cross the street, I guess you know, if you jaywalk, you'll get a ticket on your phone before you're done crossing the street.
On your phone.
On your phone. They'll know who you are. So that's how good the technology is. But if you think about how this could be applied for more, I would say, you know, business-ready purposes or something, not like that. But you know what I mean. But I think the potential of unstructured data is quite huge, and this is the next frontier. And interestingly, Bill Inman, who created the data warehouse, I mean, even back in the 90s, he kind of left the data warehouse behind the world of structured data, because he's like, this is kind of minuscule compared to the fact that like there's 9 times more data in the form of text, even in the 90s. And so he set about trying to unlock all that, right? So it isn't necessarily a new observation, but the sense that you can get more value out of unstructured data. But I think now we finally have the power to really do it this time, right?
I think it really appears that way. I mean, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's at least two, probably more categories of folks that are using that. Like there's the hardcore computer vision, like all that tech that goes into specific use cases for a lot of that unstructured data. I think most enterprises, though, are just basic in that regard, right? I need my invoice to show up when I click a link in my Power BI report, right? Like things like that. And oh, by the way, I want that stuff stored in the same location. It's easy to govern and standardize security, et cetera. But there's all
those important things.
Yeah, like, you know. But there's a whole world of really advanced, like one of our partners a couple of years ago were showing us how they worked with police departments to set up some of these cameras. And the biggest use case was, you know, if we're assuming that house ABC down the street is a drug house, how long does it take and how much time and energy is put into trying to get a warrant, go through the judicial process, et cetera? What they would do is they'd set a 2-week stakeout with cameras, and they'd have video proof of 98% of the traffic going in and out of this house, right? Like, it's a pretty compelling argument, you know? So there's some advanced stuff that they're doing with that unstructured world and being able to analyze it on the fly, which is really nice. All right.
Absolutely. Molly, I know you've been talking to customers about some of the use cases around unstructured data. What are some examples that, one or two examples that you've heard so far, just in the early days of us exploring?
Yeah, I mean, a big one is around customer support tickets. So you're getting all of this data in different forms, whether it's call transcripts, free text, survey data, things you're finding out. How do you run sentiment analysis on that? How do you use methodologies like RAG to cross-reference your commonly used answers, and how do you automate that process without hiring more people, and kind of bring it full circle of, do we want to have a chat bot on top of this? Do we want to automate alerts? Do we want to put notifications out to our customers? A lot is going on with customer support. And then another use case that seems pretty simple, but with generative AI and bringing in these different data sources, is just the data classification. Like, oh, we have this huge mess of data coming in from different sources. What's my claim data? What's my PII data that shouldn't be in my Snowflake instance?
Don't forget GDPR.
Yeah, so like things like that, or it's like, oh, like there wasn't a way to know if there was data existing that shouldn't be in that data set or in your data warehouse. So kind of the whole spectrum.
Interesting. Yeah, so there's a lot there to unpack. You talked about sentiment analysis, data classification. Those things seem to be getting a lot easier today with these newer technologies. Any thoughts about that, either Joe or Mike?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. Like sometimes when things get easier, they create a lot more challenges. So we had a conference last week at a partner, and they used an example of we were working with the largest healthcare provider in Massachusetts. All the clinicians, everyone who wanted to analyze patient data. So we took all this patient data, we anonymized it, patient ID, no PII, and we stuck it in an LLM, and they were able to ask questions of the data. How many people had, foot surgeries in the last 3 years? And, it spit back an instant English answer, right? Which was great, and everybody loved it. And then, like, the 11th hour before going to production, somebody decided to ask the question, how many patients had an MCL tear in September of 2010 with a rupture of their Achilles in August or whatever? Like, so they, very specific questions, and it came back with exactly one patient, right? Sports-related injury in Massachusetts, everybody knew who that was. That was Tom Brady, right?
Yeah.
So the next question could have been...
Did he use insurance? Come on.
Well, but the next question could have been, okay, please tell me all of the medical history for that same patient now.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And they had to put the brakes on pretty quick.
Yeah.
All right, so there's a lot of...
Do they stop it or just...
they put a layer in between now that the results don't return the exact answer. It says, oh, well, between 0 and 3 patients in the last 3 years have satisfied that criteria. Because the reality is, people on the other end asking the question needed to have something statistically relevant, not necessarily that person or patient.
Right.
So it's interesting, right, how the tech could obfuscate that a little bit. But unless you're thinking about that ahead of time, right, there's a lot of security and governance, and someone's going to game the system at some point, right?
Yeah, it's a big issue. Thoughts around?
I mean, where to begin?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
I
a lot
can
of
see you
potential.
over there turning when he was talking.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like, I think there's a lot of possibilities. I mean, generative AI is great for, I think, summarizing, classifying, and synthesizing, right? The 3 use cases I think about it. But depending on the underlying data sets and depending on the controls, you can either do really cool things or you can do dumb things really quickly, like what you just described. Or I think that's really, really dangerous. Because I could theoretically ask the same question, like, give me the medical history for Tom Brady. And it could do that, I guess. Maybe if there are no guards, sure. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
But that's the whole point. You got to think about these things. Or it might hallucinate. Texas SQL is super flaky still. I think that still needs to be worked on a lot. It comes back to your underlying data model and your structured. So the question I always ask when I tour around the world and give talks is, who would throw a large language model on top of the corporate data set today? And would you be willing to risk your job on this if it had catastrophic results? Nobody's raised their hand.
Nobody?
No, nobody's raised their hand. Actually, no, two people have. This is out of many thousands of people.
Were they still employed? Oh.
One of them is working on a large language model at their company, so so it's like, and that was a good data set. But yeah, I mean, I think when you question people, it's the same question though. Like, do you trust your corporate data sets to give you reliable answers for business intelligence or analytics? Right? If you were to ask that question, still today, what do you think the answer is?
It's got to be a low percentage of trust.
Very low.
Yeah.
Right. So we're still in the same spot.
Yeah.
So the fundamentals haven't changed, but we're tacking new stuff onto it.
I think it comes back to the quality of the data, right?
So, yeah, I mean, to some degree, it certainly does. With Texas SQL, especially if you're typing in a sentence like "give me customers," for example, it goes and infers, okay, that looks like a customer heading. These are the customer data sets. Sure, right, but it's a probabilistic answer. And some research my friend OneSix's did late last year on LLM hallucination with Texas SQL was like, what was it? I think not even 20% of the time it was accurate, right? But you throw a knowledge graph on top of it, and suddenly you got to maybe 50%, so coin flip. So you got to compare that to how good is the analyst that you would be comparing it to with the SQL and the SQL output and so forth. But it was an interesting study. But there's still a long way to go, and so I think it also comes down to, I think, high domain expertise in the people that are using these tools in order to understand. Okay, so like the smell test, right? Like that could easily have been just a naive question that somebody asked, and like, okay, let's ask that question. That seems like a great answer. One, I want the answer. So
yeah, so this concept of know your data, right? Like the whole concept here of is your data AI ready? Part of it is, are your people ready, right? It's a huge part of it. I don't care what technology I throw out there. If there isn't a level of data literacy and an understanding not only about what the data means, but what it means to your business specifically. So the story we talked about a while back was, I mean, this is a while ago, but I had a client that was a big cataloger. So they'd send catalogs, like millions of catalogs in the mail, $5 a pop, right? And the smart consultant came in and said, hey, you got this customer table in your database that you're emailing, or that you're mailing, that deceased flag equals Y, like that's like 30% of that table at $5 a pop, and you could save some real money. And they're like, well, no, Mr. Galvin, that's our most highly profitable customer segment. I'm like, you mean the dead people? Or they're like, yeah, it is a segmentation in our marketing group. What they did was, if grandma or grandpa who had passed away used to always buy the goose that they dressed up and put on the front lawn every year, they would mail it to grandma or grandpa, whoever the widow was. If grandpa passed, they'd mail it in grandpa's name even, right, to the house. And grandma would say, oh, you know what? Grandpa used to order that every year. Let's reorder, right? And I'm thinking, well, save some cash, right? Quit sending all those catalogs out.
It's one of our most
These
profitable.
are dead people. But they knew their business, right? Marketing knew their data, and they knew the implications of what they could do with that data. And that was like game-changing for them, right? Pretty easy to just send the catalog in the mail and constantly get reorders. So there's this concept of like, how do you actually teach people about the business context of your data and how it should be used? Because we can come in and engineer the heck out of it.
Yeah.
But if people that need to get the value out of it don't, because they don't understand it totally, it's a big problem. Right?
Definitely. Yeah, we talked about at Matillion keeping the human in the loop,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So, and the hallucinations and the inaccuracies that some of these new technologies are spitting out, always got to have somebody in the middle to validate and confirm. And I think one of the other things too is that back to data literacy is actually showing organizations like how bad or how good their data is. The example that Molly, you talked about, the customer. We're playing around with it internally on our support tickets, and so and we're training the model using RAG and building a model with our documentation, right, to help answer the questions and the support tickets, historical support tickets, and I think one of the things we learned was our documentation could be a lot better. It's not answering everything the best. So, but again, we keep the human in the loop in that scenario where we do have it feeding back into Salesforce service where it says these are the possible answers, so the technician doesn't have to spend the time looking them up unless they see that the answer is not accurate.
Gotcha.
So, and now we are saving a lot of time, but they're not 100% either. So, definitely some interesting use cases there. So
But it's always machine learning, though, right? If you kind of like take away the AI moniker and take the mask off, it's machine learning under the hood, as it always. But that's just it. It's always a probabilistic thing where it's, for the most part, correct, and it should be. That's what it's trained to do. Sometimes it's off, but that's the expected thing. But it's meant to scale to problems that humans wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Like you're going to go through all your documentation and customer support tickets one by one. And that's really the good use case for machine learning for the audience out there, is figure out problems that scale beyond. If you were to take 1 million humans, I like to throw this example out, to do things like, say, image classification or text classification or looking at support tickets, like how long would that take you, right? Probably never, actually, but you would never finish. So that, just find ways.
You have a
that
job for life in that scenario, Joe.
Literally. You'll be getting tchotchkes in the mail after you die away too. But these are the types of problems where machine learning has always been really good at, I think, assisting people is scaling past things that humans can do in aggregate. But things like BI is an interesting one, right? I kind of struggle with this notion. Like sometimes it's like, ask questions of your business. And I think it's cool on one hand. On the other hand, it's like the answers are usually already there in the form of charts. So the data literacy, I think, question is there too. Like, are people using the existing things to get insights into their business? Or do they want a different way of interfacing with the business? And if so, then does this markedly make things better or not? So, right? So that's the question I always struggle with.
I'm just going to try to bring up, I see we have some questions, so I'm going to try to bring those up. How do you, one question I was thinking while you're talking about that, you like AI, ML is kind of, the AI is the layer underneath it. Do you see like things like sentiment analysis and things like that in classification being easier with generative AI than it was maybe 10 years ago when you're doing NLP and you had to train a little more work, or is it easier or not easier? Any opinions on that compared today with the newer technologies and vector databases and RAG and the LLMs, or is it about the same, I guess? Comparison, anybody? I think we're all looking at Joe, who said he is a recovering data scientist.
I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think you're able to get more semantic similarity than you used to be able to. So I'm curious if that means for sentiment. Before NLP was like super limited, right? Back in the day, you're using like Word2Vec and stuff.
Yeah.
It was like super, it's a lot more token. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what the research is. Like I don't really have a dog in the fight either way, but I'm curious what the research shows in terms of larger context windows and semantic sentiment versus maybe the old school ways of doing stuff. I actually don't know.
Interesting.
One thing we're seeing at Matillion with some of our customers is with the boom of generative AI and talking about use cases like churn prediction and sentiment analysis, we actually have a lot of customers that have already been using machine learning to do this. So you're just now able to do it in a different, more automated way. And so a lot of times you bring up generative AI, the art of the possible, but then there's, we can actually do this with some of the tools and practices we have today, or seeing more customers that have been doing some of these use cases that are now possible in a different way with generative AI. So a lot of just really interesting conversations, but it's not necessarily drastically new use cases.
Right.
Interesting.
Just maybe a little more accessible.
More accessible, yeah.
Yeah, when I think about just the last 12 months of where we've seen some of this stuff get incorporated into software platforms, like you guys were at Matillion, some of the demos we did with some sentiment analysis. We did some Amazon reviews and things like that, which is pretty, like what it used to take versus what it can do, what it can take now is drastically better, right? But I still think we're scratching the surface on most of this stuff. There's just this, larger enterprise in particular, they just take a lot longer to get these things implemented, start identifying the use cases, figuring out how this stuff could be useful. Frankly, we're, as a consulting firm, usually on the leading edge of all that stuff. So we're pushing those use cases, having those conversations. But there's this longer tail of people eventually getting there that I think we don't know.
It's a really
yet.
long tail too.
It sure is.
It's a huge long tail.
So I heard, I have a good question here, but just to kind of wrap that up. So what I was hearing from some partners in the last couple weeks and talking to other consulting firms too is last year seemed to be really the year of POCs and trying to see where can we actually use these things. Would you bet your job on it? Kind of not quite there yet, but this year they are looking, the execs, the senior leadership of companies are looking for, great, let's put those things into production now. And so I think we're going to start seeing more of those. Do you guys agree? Are you seeing those as well across your people you're talking to?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the pattern for us in particular. The last 6 months, a lot of education rolling into POCs, right? But I think where people feel the safest today is, I've got 35,000 PDFs. Can you help me do some analysis of it, right?
Right.
And where it's like instantaneous. Like we talked to a client looking to do a POC. They own a bunch of gas stations. And one of the problems with gas stations is that the employees tend to be a little bit more temporary, right? They come and go. But there's a lot of training and energy put into that. Because if the gas pump's on fire, like people got to know what to do, right? And there's all kinds of rules and regulations and process for manning a gas station. And the client said, well, here's what I kind of want to prove out is I've got all this data and manuals. And if something goes wrong, the clerk's like flipping through a document or like trying to find stuff in a PDF.
Big fire.
Where's the stop
page is
button?
that
So that was a really interesting use case to kind of comb through a lot of the manuals and documentation and steps to get problems solved, and doing it in a pretty quick manner, right? So we're seeing a lot of those POCs come out.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Joe, Molly, on that topic, were you seeing other things going in production? I know, Molly, you've been talking to a lot of our prospective customers on this new capability, so what are you hearing?
I mean, what we're seeing a lot is like the first step is narrowing in on the proof of concept that is going to be successful and actually prove value, and figuring out how to not just identify the use case, but narrow in on what is required to get there. I mean, there's a big hurdle there of not just getting buy-in for using new technologies and new practices, but actually getting it into production. And am I going to bet my job that this is going to be successful? And like, there's kind of that, am I going to leap into this?
My guess is that's why they're doing things like you couldn't tap in. One, you can tap into things you couldn't before, so it's more, the probability of getting some value out of something that you never got value out of is much higher, and you probably won't lose your job because now you're getting value from something that you weren't before. Hopefully it's not the wrong value. Hopefully you're not going in the wrong direction because it's telling you something wrong, but yeah, definitely. And Joe, thoughts on this?
The same as the others. Text data, I think, is the first shoe to drop with a lot of this stuff. That's what I'm seeing. So it's the easiest one. A lot of companies have text. They have a lot of free-form documents. So
we see call scripts too. Like
call scripts, big one.
Yeah.
Big one. Yeah. So, I mean, all that kind of stuff, right? I think the next, obviously, images and even, I think, different ways of introspecting your corporate data sets. That's the structured data that's in ERP systems that's been there forever. Like that's, I think, still sort of uncharted territory, as surprising as it is, given that we're about over 50 years since the relational model was developed. But it's 1970 for those who are trying to count. This guy over here trying to do the math, and I was like, so, I think that's, I know from my experience with machine learning, actually, the structured data sets are always the hardest, though. It was always the hardest ones to do any predictions on. And I can get into the reasons why. It's pretty nuanced, but it's, in a lot of ways, when you're dealing with unstructured data sets, it's almost easier from a machine learning perspective. Because there's certain, so with text,
That's
right?
interesting, sorry, I'm like, why?
Well, okay, so if you look at like images, for example, or video, right? So we'll take images. Images is simply unwinding things into one tensor, all your pixels and your RGBs, right? And then feeding that into a deep neural network, right? And so it's pretty systematic. You don't need to do any pre-processing. Same with text for the most part, right? If you remove like headers, footers, all that stuff, it's like put chunks of text into stuff, chunk it, come with embedding and so forth. It used to be smaller, now it's bigger. Same thing, same process. Structured data is interesting. It's always human generated. It's always in these things, in these columns for some reason. We always tend to put things in columns and rows. But what is this data, right?
Yeah.
What is this stuff? And so trying to come up with any signal in some of these data sets is quite challenging, because it's like, okay, normally I'm going to try and find correlations between maybe a label and columns. The data sets are all over the place, so it's actually, depending on what it is, there's just a lot of challenges, I should say. It's a hard data set. I know this because I used to work in automated machine learning at several startups, and give us a data set, we'll give you answers. And this is such a hard problem.
It's interesting you say that, because everyone, it seems like internally, is talking about unstructured data, and we keep being like, well, don't forget about the structured data, the semi-structured data.
Oh, we've been working with it for 50 years.
Well, we got that down pat, we're good.
But apparently not so down pat.
It's a hard one, right? I mean, again, I can't get into the complexities, but it's probably going to take a long time. But yeah, I mean, suffice it to say that I think that's actually the last territory that I think is going to, when you join all these data sets together though, right? And that's what I was talking about in that post, was I think there's something in the notion, probably a few years out, it's going to require a different way of thinking about data modeling, but understanding, okay, whatever entities are in photos or videos, and tying that back to corporate data sets in a way that's sort of this unified view of your business, but for real this time, not just
and meaningful. Yeah,
not in this like tiny puddle of structured data, but everything else, text, all this stuff. Because your business, if you think about it, it operates. The structured data is actually a casualty of everything that happens in your business. It's sort of the after effect. It's what's put into the database. But the real business is run on emails and Slack messages and Teams if you're using that, and and all that kind of stuff. It's everything, and you go and look up things in the database once in a while. But a lot of cases, it's like, yeah, I don't know, just do this, and that's.
Oh, it's on that Slack channel.
I mean? Yeah, that's.
I know that.
Or Teams. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So let's take a question. This is actually a former coworker friend of mine, Christopher Klaus.
Are you getting trolled?
I'm getting trolled, yes.
Is there a pineapple reference on
There's
the
no, not in this one. Okay. There is some more pineapple questions in here, or thoughts about pineapple and ham. All right, so here's a serious question. Do you believe that fine-tuning LLM significantly helps with compliance efforts such as GDPR and HIPAA? For example, fine-tuning your LLM to better understand the data stack or to better understand the regulations themselves. I'm guessing this came in while we were talking about maybe the healthcare example that you gave, and a little talking about fine tuning, also probably using some RAG processes to influence the LLMs too, but yeah, any thoughts?
My thoughts are the amount of times people are even thinking about doing that yet, it's so early.
So early.
Right.
You had a pretty cool friend.
Christopher was a very good sales engineer back in the day that I worked with. So he was going to come today, but he couldn't make it at a customer engagement. So, thoughts on that?
Well, Mike's point, that's a very mature question, though, to ask.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, the number of people who are actually doing that or thinking about it, I would say, is like not that many.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think when we talk at Matillion about how we're doing it, not with GDPR, HIPAA, I mean, that seems like that's a very dangerous place to go with your data and large language models anyway, just because of regulations and the ability for that being exposed, I think is huge. But yeah, I think when you do work with that type of data, you need to make sure that you're in a stack that is very private. That the model you control and you own all full access to that model.
But the other part of that question was about fine tuning.
Yep.
Right. So I think that's an interesting one, because I think it depends on how you're training. Are you doing this in house, or are you doing this using a third party? Like, what's the model you're using? Because if you're doing this in house, you got to look at the cost of fine tuning versus using something like RAG or something. Because I mean, if it's going to cost you, I don't know, say $100,000, whatever, to retrain a model every time you want to try and fine tune it even further, then is that worth it?
Yeah, because it's not cheap right now to fine tune.
Good. I mean, if you're doing it in house too, I mean, good luck finding either GPUs on the cloud or buying your own. unless you have a bulk discount with NVIDIA or somebody, then you're out. So it's still hard, right? So I don't know.
Snowflake Databricks, they have discounts. So.
Yeah. But
Call them.
But yeah, so fine tuning, I think it's an argument in the ML community right now whether fine tuning is even a good idea anymore, or if it's sort of an idea that you should just ignore.
What's the alternative? Using
She's RAG for now.
RAG.
Yeah.
Maybe actually, this reminded me of for those that don't know what RAG is. Maybe Molly, you had a great at our launch event a couple months ago. You had a great analogy of what RAG is. So maybe you could tell that analogy of what RAG is to the viewers that maybe don't know what RAG is and what it does. So.
Yeah, but first to quiz you.
Oh no, don't do. I knew you were going to do that. Come on.
Can you say what the acronym stands
Retrieve, augment, generate.
Close.
Generation.
Retrieve.
Generation.
Augmented generation. Yeah, so RAG, what helps me conceptualize it is imagine your LLM, your large language model, is taking a test and it has been trained and has studied on the information that it was given. So then when you ask the LLM specific questions about your business, they don't have that education or that knowledge to give you the right answers. They might hallucinate and come up with answers they think might be right, or they might flat out say, if I'm talking to ChatGPT or whatnot, I don't have the answer to this question. And so there's a risk there. What RAG helps you do is to make this exam, if you will, for the LLM be open book. So you're able to give that encyclopedia of answers to that LLM where they can retrieve the right answers in a formatted way out of the vector store, vector database to retrieve the right answers. It's kind of reminding me of that gas station example of things are on fire, how do I solve this? If you provide that encyclopedia of, oh, on page 67, here's where you pull the right answer to this question, you're able to do that with RAG. But the data has to be in a good formatted way to make that effective, because
big red button.
Making a test open book, we've probably all been there where you're taking an open book test, but you're like, ooh, my study guide kind of sucks. So you're still not going to ace it. So that data formatting and data prep is really important.
For the record, pump on fire, that was an extreme example. That wasn't, that wasn't the actual use case.
No, but it's a fun one. Excellent. Thank you, Molly. I love that analogy. Do you guys agree to that analogy? Yeah?
It's good.
For sure.
Pretty decent. I like it a lot. We do have a small audience here, so we have a question out in the audience. So I can't see your name from here. Sorry, Russell. What question?
I have excuse me, 3 statements, 2 questions.
Oh, 3 statements.
First statement is when you're talking about HIPAA and GDPR, it depends on your industry. So if you have a nexus point of customer and interaction and you're in retail in Europe, GDPR is on your 6 every day, and anytime you have customer data in it or using a CVA, computer vision analytics model in there, and you have to make it temporal to make the action, it's there. You can't avoid it. So it's not in the offing. It's happening now, and regs go in place at the end of this year by the council for that information. Next, moving on, that's a point. The next one is that when I hear you talk about the unstructured call center data, coming from my prior experience with Rackspace, what I would suggest that you offer to your customers that you do, and I want to know if you're doing this, is look at all those tickets and look for where you have variability in your platforms or in your product, and then make a probable bug list and push that over to dev, then go against your user community and have them rank it to see what you want to have solve it and continue that healthy feedback loop, because you're missing an efficiency opportunity for what you're getting your tickets on. You can also have that same user group test your facts, FAQs that you're feeding from that and you're developing through generative AI. So anybody doing that?
Notebook on that one. Yeah, so on the point about feeding back, yes, those are the things they're finding. Not only, I mentioned documentation issues, but they are feeding back possible bugs that weren't discovered and things like that to the product team to then address. I don't believe we're feeding it back to the community to get feedback, which is I think a great idea.
Calls, but not a large number of votes. Sorry
Do you
to
know,
interrupt you.
Molly, if they're doing that, feeding it back, that information back to our user community?
I actually don't know, but
a good-
I will
good
definitely
idea.
ask.
So we use upvoting on that, and then obviously a PM and a dev, product manager and a dev manager would run over top of that.
Awesome.
Last one is academic. And
Hopefully
it's-
some product guys are listening.
Yeah, exactly. Last one is academic, and it deals with the structured versus unstructured data that we keep talking about. And when I look at it, every time we talk, or you specifically, Mike, are talking about unstructured, is that the analysis always involves adding structure to it. So I'm sitting here academically going, even in this coactive, they're making a local ID or GUID if they're passing it up to categorize the item and then run models against it. So in fact, all unstructured data eventually has structure on it to allow you to act on it, depending on where you do. So even though it's out there, I just academically, I'm sitting here going a little crazy. Like, if you don't have structure on top of it, you can't actually solve the problem, even though the unstructured data as it exists is out there. And so my question to you is, do you agree with that? Or do you feel you can just run unstructured always and you don't have to apply any structure to it to actually solve your problems?
I mean, I think, and I'll let you speak with my friends at Coactive so you can understand what they do, but if they speak in general, yeah, I mean, at some point you're needed to tag. I guess, is there a question there, or is it more of a pedantic argument about what is structured and what is unstructured?
Maybe it's pedantic. I'm not trying to be a pain in the butt. I just think you have to have structure to actually get value out of the data, is what my point is, even though it might start in an unstructured sense.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is also being able to have identifiers, right?
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I mean, it's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, at some point, you're going to need to have an identifier that ties back universally across your, quote, structured, your tabular data sets, and whatever, quote, unstructured data. But you do bring up an interesting point, though, because the term unstructured it's an interesting one where it is somewhat inaccurate. An image, for example, has structure to it. A video has structure to it, right? So, I mean, it's an image precisely because it's an image, right? So, but I think it is a fair point, though, that you need to have identifying entities and attributes throughout. I guess the whole point is now these data sets are becoming extensible, sort of up and down. And now I think the big crux for the next 10 years, I think, is going to be tying out, or whatever made up time horizon you want to have, is tying back basically all these entities together into one thing. I think that's a huge opportunity. I don't think we're there yet.
I think, I mean, if I add to this argument, the pedantic argument, I think it depends on what the outcome is. What is the action that you want, or what do you want, what type of action do you want to take on this data that you're now doing? If the action is to inform a salesperson or inform a help desk person, then you're going to have to find some type of identifier that links it back to that capability to link it to a system. So, you know, a product or a customer or, you know, a particular call event. So you're going to have to, if you want to take action on it. If you're just using it to find, you know, occurrences of X, Y, and Z that you couldn't before, maybe you don't need that identifier to link back to your structure, as you're saying. But I think it all depends, really all depends, in my opinion, on what are you trying to do with the data, right? What are you trying to do with this unstructured data that has some form of structure, but what are you trying to do with it? So, and I think that's the bigger question, is what are we trying to do with these new sets of data?
Sort of, I think, flipping on its head to the notion, because back in the day it was like tag label search or tag search and label, whatever, right? But I think the notion is, what my friends are doing is actually label search tag. So it's almost the opposite of letting the algorithm identify the labels within, you know, quote, an image, for example, and then automatically tagging it and so forth. So it frees up a lot of the work. Because if you look at an image, for example, right? I mean, if you were to just take a picture of all of us right now, what would you see? Whatever you want to see, actually. It's that's the whole point. There's a lot. But what about those microscopic elements, like the sprinkler head up there, right? Maybe that's something you wanted to see. So I think that's sort of what they're unlocking is when you're doing image recognition now. It sounds like you have a background in it, but as you know, you're tagging an image with certain objects, right, or certain things you want to classify. And I think that's what they're trying to do is flip it on its head. So you don't actually need to do that at all. So it's a really interesting space. I think that we're still at day zero, honestly, with a lot of this stuff. But it's cool to see. I don't know where it goes, but yeah. But it was actually a really good question. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
I think we have another question in the audience. I can't
Hi.
see you, but you guys can. So go for it.
Yeah. My name is Anand Ramakrishnan. I actually had two questions. The first one was related to the traditional way of data governance, right? So we are all used to our traditional way of doing, ownership of data, who owns it, who are the data stewards, et cetera. But in the new paradigm, there's no AI world. What are your views on governance as such? Right? Is AI governance matured enough to actually incorporate all the traditional ways of doing data governance, systems of truth, and those kinds of things? Or are we still ways off on that? And because that's important, thing to answer.
I mean, we're seeing a lot of this. Questions from clients around how do we do this? How do we do it efficiently? I think what has been significantly different for us in the last 5 years, for sure, is that technology exists to help governance teams automate things, right? Crawl through your reporting architectures and your databases, et cetera, to tag and classify and assign ownership and build workflow and communication. Whereas like 10 years ago, that was like somebody's spreadsheet. Here, he's the person who knows the accounting data. She's the person that knows this. And it was very disjointed. And I think now having platforms and technology to centralize some of that governance process, and frankly, not making it as manual as it used to be, is a pretty big game changer. Like there's 3 or 4 tools that we look at pretty regularly, kind of as a phase 2 of a lot of the data implementation platforms we do. Like you kind of have to have something to govern before you try to govern it. But that tech is starting to be game changing for those teams, because it was traditionally a very manual, like human intensive, process intensive thing. Whereas now the tech can do a lot of that work for you to crawl through what exists in your data estate, we'll call it, and then start to layer on some process and some people to navigate it and own it. That's at least what we're seeing so far.
It becomes an interesting recursive problem, though, because you're almost talking about like AI governed governance in a way at some point. So, yeah, it's an interesting thought. I had an article about this a few months ago. I think it was November, where I talked about how I think the struggles of data management as a broader industry and data governance specifically is. It feels like a lot of the people I know in the space, we've been talking about the same problems for decades and complaining a lot about the same stuff. Like the business doesn't get us, and governance is hard, and all that stuff. And I guess the question is, okay, so if the approaches we've been trying for the past several decades are having probably mixed results, would AI be a Hail Mary to make it work? I'm willing to take the bet that maybe this is worth considering. There are companies working on this, I'm sure. I don't know. The notion of agents will be an interesting one, coming through your data and ensuring some sort of governance with that. I think that's the only way you can scale it, though, because you factor in the amount of synthetic generated data that's about to start happening, AI generated data. And if humans couldn't do this during the good old days of structured data sets when they were teeny tiny, how do you think it's going to happen when you're not just dealing with human generated data sets, but Lord knows what else? Yeah.
That's a frightening thought is what was kind of in my mind. The second question I had was, I know, Mike, you talked about people doing a lot of POCs nowadays. It's not really mainstream, right? But there are organizations, as Molly, you were saying, that have already embraced Gen AI and they've already gone ahead. Are any organizations doing a return on investment, ROI on that? Are they doing any analytics to see that, okay, I've embraced it, so what has happened to my organization? Have I achieved A, B, C, whatever, right? So are they incorporating analytics in this whole process?
I can speak personally from what we're doing with Matillion and that customer support example. I was just talking to our data scientist this morning, and I was like, what is the return on investment on this? And he was able to give it to me. It was like 20% of our tickets now have automated responses prepared. 45% of our tickets are 90% there, still need the human in the loop, and ultimately has led to like 40% time savings. So it is cool to see things implemented and then have it be running for long enough that oh, it is important to track the return on investment for this, and what does that mean?
So time saving seems like a natural metric for that.
Yeah.
Are there any other metrics you guys are there quantities of, holy cow, we got through 100 tickets when previously it was 10, 20 in the same time frame? Like, are you guys seeing a volume play there too that you can track efficiency around?
Yeah, we're tracking the volume efficiency, what's the throughput, what's the time to answer, but then I think there's a lot of unquantifiable benefits of what you were saying, Russ, like here are new practices we can now implement. Yeah. We talk about with the human in the loop, it's not, hey, let's get rid of people. It's more, how do we make more of the resources we have, improving documentation. So there's also those unquantifiable benefits that we're tracking, but I mean, we're still early.
Makes sense. I mean, in a customer-facing role, especially at a software company, like it's hard to always gain the measure on customer satisfaction.
Yep.
But if you're turning through those things and getting answers quick, my guess is they're going to continue to be customers for a long time. All right. And how do you quantify that? Always, it's a little harder. But if it feels really good to the customer, it feels really good to your team, chances are you guys are doing all right.
I think that's the one spot where we actually aren't measuring is the impact on customer satisfaction right now. Right now, it's been more of a productivity play, which is a lot of like our customers are, you know, what is new revenue we can get from these type of projects, or can we gain productivity? You know, there's very kind of limited type of you know, outcomes that people are trying to do with AI in these type of projects today. So customer satisfaction is actually one we should talk to Julian about, so somehow, or Mark, our new CS guy. So excellent, thank you for the questions, very good. We're getting close to the wrap up time, so I'm getting the wrap up from the TV crew, which is great that we have a crew. It's amazing, so hats off to the crew, they're doing a great job, and to the team, April and Brad and everybody, and Honest Films, so thank you. So let's wrap up. Just really good discussions, guys. Thank you so much for being live. One last thought from each of you from the discussion today. What should people take away from the discussion from your points of view? So we'll just go down the line. We'll start with Joe. And
don't eat pineapple on your pizza. So, yeah, I think what I take away from this discussion is it's really exciting. There's a lot of, I think, a ton of interest, right, in data and AI right now. It's sort of rejuvenating in a lot of ways. And so I would say for data professionals, capitalize on this opportunity. Figure out how you're going to, do the things that you've always wanted to do. With data, that is. But I think it's potentially could be the next golden age of data, and I'm really excited to see what happens. Knowing full well that we obviously have to put the work in and build the foundations and so forth to get there. But this is the time to do it.
What I would say, I mean, yeah, definitely. I love now's the time with all of this emphasis on AI to get to the basics and what do you need to actually put in place. What I love about AI is you're, without a doubt, talking about business impact. So what I would recommend is talk to the business, see what kind of big, hairy problems you want to solve and see what's now possible and really get that full loop of how do we provide value to the business with that data.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. We see, and on to your question about POCs happening, like that's a lot of the work we do right now. So I think the 2 points there are start small, right? And leverage someone, shameless plug, right? Like OneSix's that has at least done a few of these, right? So they can point you in the right direction. Where are the challenges? Where are the gaps? And then I think what's kind of most critical in all this is continue to educate because this stuff changes so fast. We're trying to keep up, and this is what we do in our day jobs, right? If you're working somewhere and you've got a day job and you're trying to figure this stuff out on your own, it gets hard, right? Because the world changes overnight. So continuous education, right? I think, shoot me an email. Like we've got a lot of stuff that our team tries to use and leverage online to keep up. So happy to share that.
Excellent. I think my takeaway is a lot of possibilities out there. The art of possible is still being defined, I think, with this newer technology, but it's super important to really take care of your data, understand the data literacy and data governance. Let's not repeat some of the things that we did in the big data era, like the early stages of data lakes, where we just threw everything in and forget about the policies and governance and security. But it's an exciting time. There's a lot of emphasis, a lot of awareness at the higher levels in the organization. So I think we should capitalize on that, and some great people here in the panel to reach out to and ask questions and talk to if you have questions. So it's great. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys, for being on the show.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. And thanks until next time. Tune in for the next one. I'm sure. I don't know if it'll be live, but definitely looking forward to it. And now we're going to go eat some deep dish pizza. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.